The sound of a ball hitting the fence was the first warning. Then another. Then three more in rapid succession, each one a small percussion of rage that had been building for 7 months. Marcus Chen stood at his kitchen window, watching his neighbor's children, Karen's kids, launch tennis balls with mechanical precision at his fence. They weren't playing. They were launching. The oldest one, a 12-year-old named Tyler with his mother's sharp features and aggressive posture, gripped a metal tennis racket like a weapon and swung again. The ball exploded toward the fence with a sound like a gunshot. Marcus was 43 years old. He'd lived in this house for 14 years. He'd never had a neighbor problem before Karen Morrison moved in 2 years ago. He turned away from the window and poured himself a third cup of coffee, even though it was only 8:47 in the morning on a Saturday. His ex-wife, Patricia, used to say he was conflict avoidant in a way that borders on cowardice. She'd said this during their divorce proceedings in 2019. They'd been separated for 6 years now. She was remarried, living in Portland, and had moved on with her life in ways that sometimes made Marcus wonder if he'd done anything at all. The house was quiet except for the distant percussion of tennis balls. His daughter, Sophie, was away at college now, UC Davis, studying environmental science. She'd inherited his tendency toward non-confrontation, but she'd also inherited his stubbornness. Last time they'd talked on the phone, she'd said, "Dad, you need to handle the Karen situation. You can't just hide in your house." But what was there to handle? What could he do? The tennis balls came in waves. The children seemed to have an endless supply. Marcus's pool had been his escape from all of this. He'd installed it 5 years ago after the divorce was finalized and he'd gotten the house in the settlement. It was a modest pool, nothing extravagant, but it was his. He'd spent thousands having it built to specific dimensions with a heating system that kept it comfortable even in October and November. He was training for a charity swim across the bay, and the pool was essential to his regimen. 3 miles a week, every week, rain or shine. Karen had complained about the pool the day after the contractors finished. She'd stood at the fence in her yoga pants and designer sunglasses. She was always in yoga pants, and told him that the pool created visual pollution and that property values in the neighborhood were serious business. She'd smiled when she said it, but there was nothing friendly in that smile. It was the smile of someone who'd already decided you were an enemy. "The pool reflects light into my kitchen," she'd continued. "And the chemicals, I'm concerned about the chemicals, Marcus. Children have respiratory issues." Marcus had nodded and said nothing. He'd offered to plant a privacy hedge. He'd suggested she could put up a shade sail on her property line. He'd been accommodating in every possible way. It hadn't mattered. Over the following months, the complaints had escalated. The pool was too noisy when he swam. The music from the filter system disturbed her outdoor meditation sessions. The water was too warm. Could he be using a heat pump? Those things were terrible for the environment, Marcus. Did he care about the environment at all? Her children had been enlisted into the campaign. They'd started by peering over the fence. Then they'd begun scaling the fence, 3 or 4 times a week, diving into Marcus's pool without invitation, without asking, without any concept that this might not be okay. The first time, Marcus had been diplomatic. He'd invited them back to use the pool properly with permission whenever they wanted. He'd meant it. He liked kids. He'd been a good father to Sophie. He believed in community and kindness. Karen had refused on their behalf, but that didn't stop them from coming anyway. Then came the incidents. Tyler had broken a section of the fence climbing over it. Sophie's friend Megan had left her expensive sunglasses at the bottom of the pool. Marcus had found them and spent 20 minutes fishing them out. And when he'd returned them, Karen had complained that he'd attempted to steal them. Her exact words to the HOA. An actual formal complaint. Attempted jewelry theft. There was the time when Karen's youngest, 7-year-old Ethan, had nearly drowned in the deep end while unsupervised, and Karen had screamed at Marcus in the driveway, "Where were you? You should have been watching him." This was despite the fact that her child had trespassed into his yard without his knowledge or permission. But the worst part, the thing that had gnawed at Marcus for the past year, was the realization that he couldn't win. There was no strategy that would satisfy her, no level of accommodation that would create peace. Karen needed an enemy. She needed conflict. She needed Marcus to be the problem because without the problem, she would have to look at her own behavior. That morning, standing in his kitchen at 8:47, listening to the tennis balls assault his fence, Marcus made a decision. His cardiologist had told him to reduce stress. His therapist had suggested that he needed to establish firm boundaries and enforce them with conviction. His daughter had said, in so many words, that he was being a doormat. The pool drain plug was located in the mechanical room, a small structure attached to the garage where the circulation system hummed constantly. Marcus had never manually drained the pool before. The system was designed to handle maintenance cycles automatically. But the plug was there, emergency drainage, right next to the equipment manual. He walked out to the mechanical room slowly, like a man approaching a decision he wasn't sure about. The sound of the tennis balls had stopped, but he could hear the children laughing, that high, sharp laughter that had the quality of possession, as if they owned the backyard beyond their fence line. He opened the manual. The drainage procedure was straightforward. Turn the multi-port valve, open the drain plug. The water would find its way to the storm drain system beneath the street. The whole process would take about 12 hours. By tomorrow morning, his pool would be empty. He held his hand on the valve for a full minute, aware that this was a point of no return. Once he drained the pool, there would be nothing left to want, nothing left to trespass into, nothing left to complain about. The victory would be bitter, but it would be a victory. His phone buzzed, a text from Sophie. "Hi, Dad, quick call later. I had a question about the house." He typed back, "Sure, evening okay." He didn't mention the pool. He didn't mention Karen. He didn't mention the tennis balls or the boundary violations or the 7 months of escalating tension that had worn him down until he decided to drain 13,000 gallons of water from his backyard just to have peace. Instead, he opened the valve. The sound of the water beginning to drain was like the sound of relief itself, a long, deep whoosh of pressure releasing. The water level began to drop almost immediately. Somewhere beneath the deck, the storm drain system accepted his neighbor's problem and made it disappear. Marcus stood there for 5 minutes, watching the water recede, feeling something he hadn't felt in months: control. By 10 a.m., the decline was visible to anyone looking over the fence. By noon, the pool was noticeably half full. By 3 p.m., it was a shallow basin. By sunset, it was empty, nothing but concrete and damp residue, like a forgotten swimming hole after a drought. He didn't hear from Karen that day. He didn't hear from her the next day either. The silence was its own kind of victory, and Marcus allowed himself to feel it fully, the quiet satisfaction of having removed the object of contention from his life. It was the last peace he would have. Monday morning, the trash bins from Karen's house appeared in Marcus's driveway at 4 a.m., positioned directly behind his car. He discovered them when he left for his morning run, and it took him 10 minutes to process what he was seeing. He moved them back to her property carefully without confrontation. If she noticed, she didn't respond. By Tuesday, the lawn suddenly became the issue. Karen arrived at his front door at 7 a.m. with her phone in hand, showing him pictures she'd taken. His grass, she explained in a voice that simulated concern, had been getting alarmingly tall. She'd documented it. There were timestamps. She was planning to file a formal complaint with the HOA, not because she wanted to, she emphasized this, but because she cared about all of our properties. Marcus looked at his lawn. It was normal, maybe slightly long but well within the neighborhood standards. He'd been planning to mow on Wednesday. "I'll take care of it," he said. "I'm sure you will," she replied, and her smile was the same one she'd given about the pool, the predator smile, the one that said she'd already won the argument before he'd even had the chance to speak it. He mowed the lawn that afternoon, 2 days early. On Wednesday, his recycling bin mysteriously appeared in the street, tipped over, its contents scattered across the asphalt. Bottles rolled into the storm drain. Cardboard boxes disintegrated in the morning dew. By the time Marcus discovered it, half of it was already soaked and ruined. He picked it up and recycled what he could. That evening, his daughter called. "Dad, I have to ask you something," Sophie said, and even over the phone, Marcus could hear the exhaustion in her voice. She was a college student working 2 part-time jobs. She didn't have time for drama. "Did you really drain your pool?" The question was so unexpected that Marcus took a moment to answer. "Yes," he said finally. "Why?" "Because Mom just called me. She was upset. She said that Karen Morrison called her to tell her that her children were devastated, that you destroyed their recreational space, and that now they wanted to sue you for emotional distress." Marcus sat down on the couch, the phone still pressed to his ear. "Sue me," he repeated stupidly. That's what Karen told Mom. She's threatening legal action. She's also apparently filing a complaint with the city about your property, something about deliberate environmental violation. Dad, what happened? He tried to explain. The years of trespassing, the boundary violations, the constant complaints, the feeling of having no options left. Sophie listened in silence. When he finished, she said, "Dad, you can't drain your pool because her kids keep sneaking into it. That's not a legal solution, that's reactive, and now you're giving her ammunition." "She's always had ammunition," Marcus said bitterly. "Maybe," Sophie acknowledged, "but not like this." By Thursday, the official letter arrived from an attorney. It was printed on expensive letterhead, from a firm called Morrison & Associates, Karen's maiden name. The letter alleged that Marcus had deliberately drained his swimming pool with the express purpose of causing emotional distress to the children of the neighboring property. It went on to claim damages to the mental health and well-being of minors and threatened pending legal action unless Marcus took immediate remedial action to restore said pool and provide written apology. The letter was, on its face, absurd. It had no legal standing, but it was also not a joke. Marcus called his own attorney, a woman named Rebecca Walsh who'd handled his divorce proceedings. She read the letter twice and then laughed. "This is theater," Rebecca said. "It's designed to intimidate you. Technically, you have every right to drain your own pool on your own property. There's no law against it. The emotional distress claim won't hold up. There's no legal standard for environmental damage in someone's own backyard, and children have no property rights over a neighbor's amenities." But what?" Marcus asked. "But she can drag you through the legal system. She can file claims with the city. She can keep escalating until one of them sticks, and it'll cost you money every step of the way just defending yourself." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios. He could refill the pool, but that felt like surrender. He could ignore the letter, but that felt dangerous. He could call Karen and try to negotiate, but years of interaction had taught him that negotiation with her was impossible. He was trapped. He was still awake at 3 a.m. when the first rock came through his bedroom window. It didn't hit him. It landed on the floor with a crash of shattering glass and a dull thud of impact. Marcus lurched upright, his heart pounding, and saw the rock glinting in the moonlight. It was large, maybe the size of a grapefruit, wrapped in something. He got out of bed slowly, aware that someone was on his property, aware that this had crossed into actual criminal territory. There was a note wrapped around the rock, held in place with a rubber band. "You destroyed my children's happiness," it read in handwriting that Marcus recognized as Karen's. "You are a selfish, cruel man. You will pay for this." Marcus stood in his bedroom, barefoot on the hardwood floor, surrounded by glittering shards of safety glass, and felt something crack inside him as well. By Friday morning, he had called the police. The responding officer, a young man named Ramirez with kind eyes and a practiced neutral expression, documented the rock and the note. He asked if Marcus wanted to press charges. Marcus said yes, then immediately wondered if that had been a mistake. The officer explained that the evidence was circumstantial. Nothing connected the rock definitively to Karen, though the handwriting seemed like it might match. The officer would file a report. There would be a record of the incident. "Will you arrest her?" Marcus asked. "Not without stronger evidence," Officer Ramirez said gently. "But this is documented now. If there are other incidents, that context matters." By Saturday, a week after draining the pool, Marcus woke to find every single one of his car windows smashed. The damage was done overnight. Whoever had done it had taken their time, walking methodically from window to window with what looked like a hammer. This time, Marcus didn't call the police. He called Rebecca. "This is escalating," he said into the phone, and he could hear the tremor in his own voice. "Yes," Rebecca agreed. "I'm going to file for a restraining order. This has crossed into harassment and vandalism." "Will that stop her?" "No," Rebecca said quietly, "but it will create a legal record, and it might make her think twice about the next thing." By the following Wednesday, Marcus had learned that Karen Morrison did not think twice. She thought once and acted immediately, with the conviction of someone who had decided that the rules didn't apply to her. There was glue in his mailbox, thick industrial adhesive that had hardened around the mechanism, rendering it unusable. There were nails distributed across his driveway, forcing him to pump his tires twice in 4 days. Someone had spray-painted the word bully across his garage door in red letters. The restraining order hearing had been scheduled for the following week, but the damage was being done in real time. By Thursday night, Marcus was living in a state of hypervigilance. He kept his curtains closed. He didn't go to the gym. He didn't leave the house except when absolutely necessary, and even then, he took the long route around the neighborhood to avoid driving past Corinne's property. Sophie called every evening now, checking in, and Marcus could hear the worry in her voice. "Dad, you need to escalate this," she said on that Thursday. "You need to do more than just restraining orders. You need to go on offense." "I don't know what that means," Marcus said. "It means fighting back. It means making it cost her something." Marcus thought about the rock through his window, the smashed car windows, the glue in his mailbox, the spray paint, the emotional weight of knowing that someone was actively working to make his life miserable. Making it cost her something, he could think of many ways to accomplish that. None of them legal, none of them things he would do. "I'm not like her," he said to his daughter. "I know, Dad, that's the problem." That evening, Officer Ramirez showed up at Marcus's door again, this time in an official capacity. He had a folder and an expression that Marcus had learned to recognize as news that isn't good. "We found something," Officer Ramirez said, and Marcus's stomach dropped. "During our investigation into the property damage at your house, we reviewed neighborhood security footage, from Mrs. Morrison's system, actually. She provided it to us willingly." "Okay," Marcus said slowly. "There's footage of you draining the pool. We have the timestamp. July 14th, 8:47 a.m. Marcus had thought he understood the situation. He hadn't. And he prompted. And Officer Ramirez continued, "Mrs. Morrison is claiming that this constitutes a deliberate environmental violation. She's filed a formal complaint with the city's environmental department. She's also filed a complaint about harassment, claiming that the pool drainage was a targeted campaign of intimidation against her children." "That's insane," Marcus said. "The pool is my property." "Technically, yes," Officer Ramirez said. "But the environmental department is going to investigate. They're particularly concerned because there's a creek that runs behind the neighborhood, and they're wondering if improper drainage could have contaminated it. The water drained into the storm system. There are regulations for that. I did it properly." "I believe you," Officer Ramirez said, and he did seem to believe Marcus. "But you should probably consult with an environmental lawyer, just to be safe." After Officer Ramirez left, Marcus sat on his couch in the dark and realized that he'd made a strategic error of astronomical proportions. He'd thought that draining the pool would end the conflict. Instead, it had created a new conflict, one that had expanded beyond personal dispute into the realm of regulatory agencies and legal compliance. He called Rebecca again. "How much is an environmental lawyer?" he asked. "A lot," Rebecca said. "But let's not jump ahead. Tell me exactly what you did with the water." Marcus explained the process: the drain plug, the multi-port valve, the 13,000 gallons flowing into the storm drain system. "Did you check the chemistry?" Rebecca asked. "No," Marcus said. "The water was just chlorinated pool water." "And you have a permit for the pool itself?" "Of course, I got one when I had it installed." "Okay, let me look into the environmental code for your jurisdiction. There might be requirements for pool drainage that you violated unknowingly. Or there might not be. We need to know before the city comes asking." Rebecca called him back within 2 hours. "You're fine," she said. "As long as you didn't add any algaecide or other non-standard chemicals to the pool before draining, the city has no case. Chlorinated water draining into a storm system is handled thousands of times a day in this state. It's not an environmental violation." "But Corinne filed a complaint," Marcus said. "Yes, and it will be investigated. It will be closed within a few days with a finding of no violation. But it'll be a few days of waiting and stress." Which was, of course, exactly the point. Corinne wasn't trying to win a legal battle. She was trying to wage a war of attrition, wearing Marcus down, one complaint at a time, one violation of his peace at a time, until he either broke or gave up. Marcus understood now that he'd underestimated her. Corinne Morrison was not a person who could be negotiated with or reasoned with or satisfied. She was a force of nature, a person who had decided that total victory was the only acceptable outcome. He also understood that he was losing. The next morning, a Friday, Marcus woke up and made a decision. He was going to go on offense, not through vandalism or harassment, but through the only available legal weapon, documentation and evidence. He contacted a private investigator named David Park, whose company was called Clarity Investigations. David was expensive, $400 per day, but he specialized in neighborhood disputes and had a reputation for thorough work. "I need you to document everything," Marcus told him over the phone. "Every incident, every piece of evidence. I need to build a case." "What kind of case?" David asked. "A harassment case, vandalism, criminal mischief. I need to prove that my neighbor is systematically destroying my property and making my life impossible." David listened, asked questions, and then gave Marcus an honest assessment. "Mr. Chen, most of this won't stick criminally. The civil harassment claim is stronger, but it's also expensive to litigate. You're looking at $15,000 to $20,000 in legal fees minimum to get this in front of a judge. And there's no guarantee you'll recover damages even if you win." "I don't care about money," Marcus said. "I care about making it stop." "Then you should know that filing a lawsuit and forcing discovery is often the most effective way to make the harassment stop. Once Karen realizes that her actions are now legal documents that will be examined and analyzed, she usually decides it's not worth the cost. Not in money, but in exposure." "Do it," Marcus said. "File whatever you can file." By the following Wednesday, the same day as his restraining order hearing, Marcus's attorney filed a complaint alleging systematic harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and willful destruction of property. The filing was a thing of beauty dense with documentation, photos of the spray paint, the broken windows, the glued mailbox, timeline of events, witness statements from neighbors who'd noticed the pattern of incidents. The complaint requested $50,000 in damages, a permanent injunction against any contact or proximate presence, and a court order prohibiting Karen from filing any further complaints against Marcus without legal representation present. It was aggressive, it was definitive. It was Marcus playing the game the way Karen had taught him to play it. He walked into the courthouse on Wednesday afternoon feeling something he hadn't felt in weeks: hope. The restraining order was granted almost immediately. The judge took one look at the evidence and sustained the order. Marcus was walking out of the courthouse when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The text contained a single word: done. Marcus stared at it. Then another text came through from another unknown number: "You're not winning." Then another: "Everyone will know what you are." Then another: "My lawyers are ready." Marcus showed the text to Rebecca. "She's sending threats through burner phones," Rebecca said calmly, "which is a violation of the restraining order and also constitutes additional harassment. Document them all. Take screenshots. You're building the case as we speak." But there was something else in the texts, something that Marcus recognized beneath the rage. It was fear. Karen had understood, finally, that Marcus was willing to take this to court, that he was willing to spend money and time and emotional energy on this conflict rather than back down. She was losing control of the narrative. That evening, Officer Ramirez called. "Just wanted to let you know," he said. "The environmental department closed their investigation, finding of no violation. The pool drainage was done properly." "Thank you for letting me know," Marcus said. "Also," Officer Ramirez continued, "we traced some of the damage to your property, the windows specifically. A witness came forward. We're following up, but it looks like evidence is pointing toward Karen Morrison's son, Tyler. We're going to bring charges of vandalism, destruction of property. Mrs. Morrison will be held responsible as the parent of a minor, but the boy himself will face juvenile charges." Marcus felt the victory settle into his chest, but it wasn't sweet. It was hollow and heavy like a stone. "What happens to him?" Marcus asked. "Depends on his record, his age," the judge. "Could be community service. Could be probation. It's the juvenile system, so the goal is rehabilitation over punishment." Marcus hung up and sat in the dark of his house, understanding finally what he'd done. He'd won. But winning against Karen Morrison meant winning against her children. It meant standing in a courthouse and watching a 12-year-old boy face charges for vandalizing his neighbor's property. That evening, the doorbell rang. Marcus wasn't expecting anyone. He almost didn't answer it. But when he looked through the peephole, he saw Karen standing there alone without her children. Her face was red and blotchy. Her hair was unstyled. She looked like a woman who'd been crying. He opened the door but didn't step outside. "Please," she said, and her voice was hoarse, raw. "Please don't do this. Don't press charges against Tyler. He's just a kid. He was just trying to—" "Trying to what?" Marcus asked, and he was surprised by how cold his voice sounded. "Teach his neighbor a lesson. Follow your example." "He made a mistake," Karen said. "We made a mistake. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please just let him go. Don't ruin his life over windows." Marcus thought about all the nights he'd lain awake wondering why his neighbor hated him, about the anxiety that had settled into his bones like a chronic disease, about how he'd drained his pool just to have peace. "It's not my decision now," he told her. "It's the justice system's." Karen's face crumpled. "Then you're just like me," she said quietly. "You're willing to destroy something just to win." She turned and walked back to her car, and Marcus realized that she was right. Not entirely, not completely, but right enough. In trying to stop being a doormat, he'd become something worse. He'd become the architect of his own neighbor's pain and her child's criminal record. He closed the door and went back to his empty house, and for the first time, he wasn't sure which of them had won. The hearing for the vandalism charges against Tyler Morrison was scheduled for 2 weeks later, in juvenile court, on a Tuesday morning in early December. Marcus received a subpoena to appear as the victim and property owner. Rebecca advised him to attend, to present his case, to make sure that the legal system understood the full scope of the harassment and property damage. He attended. He sat in the courtroom. He looked at Tyler Morrison, still angry, still defiant, but also small, trying to appear older than 12 in a shirt that was clearly borrowed from an older sibling, and testified about the smashed windows, the broken glass, the fear of finding more damage. The prosecutor presented evidence. Marcus's attorney cross-examined Tyler's defense lawyer. The judge listened and took notes. By the end of the day, Tyler was found responsible for the vandalism. The sentence was 90 days of probation, 40 hours of community service, and 50 hours of counseling, specifically designed around anger management and understanding the impact of one's actions on neighbors. His parents would have to pay restitution, $3,200 to cover the window repairs. It was, by the standards of the juvenile justice system, relatively lenient. But as Marcus watched Karen's face in the gallery while the sentence was read, he understood that leniency was irrelevant. The damage had been done. Her son now had a record. Her son now had to attend court-ordered counseling. Her son now understood, in a way that statistics and lectures couldn't teach, that actions had consequences. In her eyes, Marcus had destroyed her child's future. She glared at him as they left the courtroom, and he saw in that glare the crystallization of something permanent. The conflict between them was no longer a neighborhood dispute. It was vendetta. The next 2 weeks were quiet in a way that felt ominous. No new incidents, no broken windows, no spray paint, no rocks, no threats. It was worse than the harassment, somehow. The silence suggested that Karen was planning something, waiting for something, preparing to make a move that would be final. Marcus's civil lawsuit was progressing steadily. Rebecca had deposed both Karen and her husband, had gathered documents, was building the case methodically. There was a trial date set for March. In the meantime, the restraining order was holding. Karen was not permitted within 100 feet of Marcus or his property. Any violation would result in immediate arrest. Everything should have felt resolved. Instead, it felt like a suspension. Sophie came home for winter break on December 15th, and Marcus picked her up from the airport with a sense of relief that bordered on desperation. His daughter had always had a steadying influence on him, a way of making him see things clearly. She took one look at his face and said, "Oh, Dad." "What?" he asked. "You look tired, like genuinely tired, not just sleep tired, life tired." They drove home mostly in silence. When they got to the house, Sophie stood in the driveway looking at the fresh paint over the bully, graffiti, and the evidence of window repairs that still stood out against the rest of the house's aging exterior. "This has really done a number on you," she said finally. "I'm handling it," Marcus said, though both of them knew this wasn't true. They had dinner that night. Sophie made her famous pasta, and they ate together at the kitchen table like they used to when she was still in high school, and Marcus found himself telling her things he hadn't shared with anyone else. The fear, the anger, The sense of helplessness he'd felt before he'd decided to drain the pool. The strange emptiness of victory once he'd actually achieved it. "Do you know what you did wrong?" Sophie asked, and she was speaking in the tone of someone who was about to deliver a hard truth that was necessary. "What?" Marcus asked. "You tried to win against someone who could never be beaten in the way you needed to beat them. Mom tried too during the divorce. She kept trying to get you to fight harder, to be meaner, to play the game the way Karen plays it. But that's not who you are. And I kept trying to get you to admit that Karen would never be satisfied no matter what you did. So instead of doing that, you did the thing that made you into exactly what she accused you of being. You became the bully." Marcus wanted to argue. He wanted to say that he'd been defending himself, that he'd had no choice, that Karen had left him no option other than escalation. But he recognized, as Sophie was speaking, that these were the same arguments Karen had made when she'd come to his door, begging him not to press charges against Tyler. "What should I have done?" he asked. Sophie thought about this for a long time. "I don't know," she said finally. "Maybe there wasn't a right answer. Maybe some situations don't have right answers. Maybe sometimes you're just trapped, and whatever you choose, you're going to feel terrible about it." "That's not very comforting," Marcus said. "No," Sophie agreed, "it's not." The day after Christmas, Marcus received a call from Rebecca. "We have a problem," Rebecca said, and in those 4 words, Marcus felt everything shift. "What kind of problem?" he asked. "Karen's attorney contacted me. They're willing to settle the lawsuit, but the settlement has a condition." "What condition?" "She wants you to publicly apologize, in writing, for draining the pool with malicious intent and without regard for the emotional well-being of the neighborhood children. She wants this letter made available to the HOA and to any future neighbors you might have disputes with. She's essentially asking you to permanently brand yourself as the aggressor in this conflict." Marcus felt something crack inside him. "She's asking me to admit that I was wrong," he said slowly. "Yes," Rebecca confirmed. "And in exchange, she'll drop the lawsuit against you, the one where her attorney claimed environmental violation. She'll also request that the charges against Tyler be reduced to a lesser offense with expungement after probation completion. So her son committed vandalism, but if I apologize for draining my pool, his record gets cleaned." "That's the gist of it," Rebecca said. "It's a devil's bargain. You get legal peace, but you have to accept permanent blame. She gets her son out of trouble." Marcus looked out his window at the empty pool, now a permanent feature of his backyard. The concrete was cracked now from disuse. Leaves collected in the drain. It looked like a tomb. "If I don't take the deal," he asked. "Then we go to trial in March. You'll likely win, your case is strong, but it'll take time and money. And you'll have to watch Tyler's trial play out as well. The boy will serve his sentence. Your life and Karen's life will be public record." "And if I take the deal?" "You write a letter, you apologize, you settle. Everyone walks away, but you're the one who had to concede defeat." Marcus told Rebecca he'd think about it and hung up. That night, he couldn't sleep. He stood on his deck, looking at the empty pool, thinking about what victory looked like and whether it mattered if no one else agreed that you'd won. Marcus was driving to the grocery store on Thursday afternoon when he saw the police car with its lights on, parked at the corner of his street. His heart rate immediately spiked. The first thought was that something else had happened. More damage, more accusations, more chaos. But when he pulled closer, he saw that the police car wasn't parked at his house. It was parked at Karen's house. And there were 2 officers standing at her front door, and Karen was standing in the doorway, and she looked frightened in a way that Marcus had never seen before. He pulled into his own driveway and watched from a distance. One of the officers, not Ramirez, someone older, was speaking with Karen, gesturing, pointing toward her driveway. The other officer was taking photographs of something. Marcus couldn't see what from his vantage point, but he could see Karen's face, and he could see the moment she understood that something terrible was happening. By the time the officers left 20 minutes later, there were 3 police cars at the house, and Karen's husband, David, was standing in the driveway looking shell-shocked. Karen had disappeared inside. Marcus went inside his own house and tried not to think about it. He failed. At 5 p.m., his phone rang. Officer Ramirez. "I thought you should know," Ramirez said. "We found evidence of child abuse at the Morrison residence. A mandatory report was filed with Child Protective Services. Tyler and Ethan are being interviewed. We're investigating." "What kind of abuse?" Marcus asked, though part of him didn't want to know. "I can't go into details," Ramirez said, "but there were marks, evidence of physical punishment beyond what's considered reasonable discipline. The kids disclosed incidents to a school counselor. It's being taken very seriously." Marcus sat down. Did I cause this?" he asked. "What do you mean?" Ramirez asked. "By pressing charges, by testifying, did the stress of that cause him too?" "Mr. Chen," Ramirez interrupted gently, "child abuse isn't something that happens as a result of legal proceedings. Abuse is abuse. It was happening before. We don't know how long it's been happening, but it wasn't caused by your lawsuit." Nonetheless, after Ramirez hung up, Marcus felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders like a physical thing. He called Sophie immediately. "Dad, this is not your fault," Sophie said firmly after he'd explained the situation. "This is Karen and her husband's fault. Whatever is happening to those kids, it's because of their choices, not yours." "But if I hadn't—" "If you hadn't what? Defended yourself. Draining your pool didn't cause child abuse. Testifying in court didn't cause child abuse. The people who abuse children cause child abuse." Sophie was right. Intellectually, Marcus understood that. But emotionally, he was entangled in the web of consequences that seemed to radiate outward from his decision to drain the pool. One action, 7 months, a dozen consequences, children separated from their home, a woman arrested, lives irreversibly altered. That night, Marcus made his decision about Rebecca's offer. He called her at home. "Tell her I'll take the deal," he said. "Tell her I'll write the apology letter exactly as she requested." "Marcus, are you sure?" Rebecca asked. "You don't have to do this, you're winning." "I don't feel like I'm winning," Marcus said. "Well," Rebecca said carefully, "she's about to have her child custody case heard by the courts. Whatever victory you think you have is going to feel very small compared to what's about to happen to her family." "Exactly," Marcus said. "I don't want to win like that." Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "Let me draft the letter," she said finally. "I'll send you a version and you can edit it until it feels honest enough to sign." The letter took 3 days to draft. Rebecca kept it simple, focused on the pool drainage itself rather than Marcus's intentions or motivations. "Dear members of the community, I am writing to take responsibility for my decision to drain my swimming pool on July 14th of this year. This decision was made without proper consideration for how it would impact others in the neighborhood, particularly the neighboring children who had grown attached to the pool. While I had legitimate concerns about property boundaries, I chose a response that was extreme and unkind. I regret the distress this caused to the Morrison family and any other neighbors who were affected. In the future, I am committed to addressing disputes through dialogue and proper channels rather than unilateral action. I apologize. Sincerely, Marcus Chen." The letter was careful, technically truthful, and utterly humiliating. Marcus read it over and over, adjusting words, trying to find a version of it that he could live with. In the end, he signed the original. Rebecca sent it to Karen's attorney on January 3rd. Within a week, the civil lawsuit was settled. Tyler's charges were reduced to a misdemeanor with a promise of record expungement upon completion of probation. The environmental violation complaint was officially dismissed. The Morrison children were returned to their mother's custody on February 12th, pending a full hearing in March. Karen was required to attend parenting classes and family therapy. David Morrison moved out of the house and into an apartment across town. The neighborhood waited and watched and gossiped about what had happened behind closed doors at 47 Maple Street. Marcus was back to his normal life, or as close to normal as he could get. He'd gone back to the gym. He was running again. He was trying to sleep at night without playing through the last 8 months repeatedly, analyzing every decision, wondering if he could have done anything differently. It was on February 14th, Valentine's Day, that the doorbell rang. Marcus answered it cautiously, aware that the restraining order was still in place, that Karen still wasn't supposed to be within 100 feet of his house. But it wasn't Karen at the door, it was Tyler. The boy was older looking than he had been 3 months earlier. He'd grown taller, or he was standing straighter, or the anger had worn a different shape into his face. He held an envelope in his hands. "My mom said I should give this to you," Tyler said, "and that I should apologize in person." "Tyler, you shouldn't be here," Marcus said. "The restraining order." I know I'm leaving in a minute, The boy's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. I'm sorry for breaking your windows and for the other stuff. My mom said that I was just doing what she was doing and that I didn't understand that there were consequences, and I didn't, but I do now. Marcus looked at this angry, confused 12-year-old boy who had vandalized his property and caused him months of anxiety, and he saw something in Tyler's face that he recognized. A child caught between loyalty to his mother and the first awareness that loyalty might not be enough to excuse certain actions. It's okay, Marcus said, and he meant it. I accept your apology. I have to go, Tyler said. He handed over the envelope and left, walking quickly back down the driveway toward a car parked at the end of the street, not Corinne's car. Probably a family member's. Marcus opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from Corinne. Not printed, not drafted by an attorney. Just Corinne's handwriting on regular notebook paper. Dear Marcus, I have spent the past 2 weeks in family therapy understanding the role I played in my children's behavior and my family's crisis. My therapist has explained to me what I think I've always known, that I was using my conflict with you as an outlet for my own anger and unhappiness, that I was modeling, for my children, how to hurt people when we felt hurt, that I was so focused on being right that I couldn't see how wrong I was being. I know that an apology doesn't undo the damage. I know that you shouldn't have had to apologize for draining your pool in order for me to face consequences for my behavior. I know that the terms of our settlement were unfair to you and that you took them anyway, and I understand now what that cost you. I also know that your public apology has given me something I don't deserve, a second chance. The people in the neighborhood are treating me with something like sympathy instead of judgment. My children are in therapy, and we're learning how to be a family again. And I'm starting to understand that the reason I was so angry at you wasn't really about the pool at all. I was angry at myself, for a lot of things, for my marriage, for my parenting, for the choices I've made. And I projected all of that onto you because you were convenient and because you didn't fight back until you did, and then I fought back harder. I want you to know that I see what happened, all of it, and I'm ashamed. I'm deeply, genuinely ashamed. I'm going to get better, not for you, for my kids. But I wanted you to know that your kindness, and yes, I recognize now that taking a deal that humiliates you was a form of kindness, a way of giving me an exit, didn't go unnoticed. I'm sorry. Corinne Morrison. Marcus stood in his kitchen holding Corinne's letter, and he experienced something that felt almost like forgiveness. Not forgiveness of her actions. Those still hurt, still mattered, still needed to be accounted for. But forgiveness of her as a person, recognition that she was human and broken, and doing her best with the tools she had, even if those tools were destructive. He understood, finally, what had happened to them. They'd been two people with legitimate grievances and poor communication skills, and they'd allowed their conflict to escalate until it had consumed them both. She'd been cruel, yes, but he'd been reactive. She'd been harmful, but he'd been willing to win at any cost. They'd been locked in a dance where every move forced the other person to move, until the dance had become more important than any of them. He refilled his pool in March. It took a week and cost him several $100s in chemicals, but he filled it because it was his to fill, not because Corinne's absence made him want it anymore. He was training again for the charity swim, and he needed to train. Corinne didn't complain. When he saw her a few months later at the neighborhood association meeting, she was there, he was there, they were in the same room for the first time since the legal proceedings. She nodded at him. Not friendly, not apologetic, just acknowledging, yes, this happened. Yes, we survived it. Yes, we're going to keep living here. Sophie came home from college that summer, and she swam in the pool with her father, and they didn't talk about Corinne or the conflict or the letter. They just swam. By August, new neighbors had moved in 3 blocks down, a family with 2 kids. Marcus felt a small flutter of anxiety when he saw them moving boxes into their house, and then he understood. He would be nervous about his neighbors for a very long time, possibly forever. But he also understood that anxiety and neighborly conflict were not the same thing, that you could coexist with people you didn't like, that boundaries could exist without warfare. In November, exactly 1 year after draining his pool, Marcus was in his backyard when Tyler Morrison walked by the open gate. The boy was 13 now, taller, different. He looked at the full pool and made a gesture that was almost apologetic. "It looks good," Tyler said. "Yeah," Marcus replied, "it does." The boy kept walking, and Marcus realized that they would, in all likelihood, be neighbors for the rest of their lives. That Corinne and David would probably get divorced. That Tyler and Ethan would grow up with this neighborhood dispute as part of their history. That he would see these people sometimes on the street or at the store, and they would be connected by this thing that had happened between them. Not allies, not enemies, but people who had learned something about themselves from colliding. That evening, Sophie called from Davis. "How's the pool?" she asked, which was her way of asking how he was doing. "Full," Marcus said. "We're good." "Dad," Sophie said carefully, "I hope you know that the way you handled the settlement, how you were willing to take blame that wasn't entirely yours, I hope you know that wasn't weakness." "What was it?" Marcus asked. "It was mercy," Sophie said. "It was choosing to believe that people can get better instead of choosing to punish them for being bad. I think I was wrong when I told you that you needed to fight harder. I think you were right all along. Some things don't need to be won. They need to be survived." After they hung up, Marcus sat by his full pool and watched the sun set behind the neighborhood, painting the water gold, and he felt something settle in his chest that felt almost like peace. Marcus never did complete his charity swim. After the pool incident, swimming had become something complicated, tied up with anxiety and conflict. He'd pivoted to running instead and eventually completed a half marathon at age 48. He'd also taken up pottery, mostly because Sophie had suggested it as a way to do something that had no connection to anyone else. Corinne Morrison and her husband finalized their divorce in 2026. Corinne kept the house, the children, and a job as a graphic designer working from home. David remarried 2 years later. Tyler and Ethan got counseling, and by all appearances, grew into relatively normal teenagers who occasionally waved at their neighbor over the fence in a way that suggested they'd all agreed to let the past stay in the past. Sophie graduated with honors and took a job with the California Environmental Protection Agency. She was still in the state, close enough to visit regularly, far enough to have her own life. And Marcus, he lived in his house on Maple Street with its full pool and its fixed windows and its painted-over graffiti. He attended neighborhood meetings. He donated to the local food bank. He was, to anyone observing, a normal neighbor in a normal neighborhood. But sometimes, on quiet Saturday mornings, he would stand at his kitchen window and watch the water move gently in the pool, the same pool that had caused so much pain. And he would think about consequences and choices, and how one decision to drain a pool had set off a chain reaction that had touched everyone around him. He would think about Corinne's letter and her face at the neighborhood meeting. He would think about Tyler's apology and the weight of understanding that actions have victims always, even when you believe yourself to be justified. And he would remind himself that the neighbor you have to learn to live with is sometimes yourself, the angry, reactive version that you discover you're capable of becoming when pushed far enough. Then he'd finish his coffee and move on with the day, which is what you do when you've survived something and come out the other side, understanding that survival and victory are not the same thing, and that sometimes the bravest choice is not to escalate, but to step back and let other people make their own mistakes and learn from them, the way you did. The water in the pool sparkled in the morning sun, and life went on.